This is a Film Stories original podcast.
We made this.
Welcome to the X-Cast. The truth is in here. I'm your host, Zach Moore, and with me today is Mr. Matt Latham. What's up, Matt?
Oh, good, thanks. Hey, yourself?
I'm doing great, Not that we've been talking before we just recorded at all.
This is like acting.
Well, Matt, how are you this evening? So, reopening the X-Files, and this is our first X-Files podcast, X-Cast, to be on together, isn't it, Matt?
It is, yes. This is kind of weird. Actually, it's weird not talking about what we usually talk about.
Yeah, so yeah, we usually talk about Always Soul in the Smallville, which we'll plug at the end of the podcast. But anyway, that being said, the X-Cast is kind of what brought us together on Smallville, right? Because you're friends with Tony, and then I'm friends with Tony from the podcasting, and I have my Smallville podcast, and you were watching it. So this is what kind of brought us together. So now you're a regular and welcome guest over on one of my other podcasts. But we're talking about the X-Files today. We're talking about Synchrony, which is about time travel. Now, the X-Files, it dabbled into time travel occasionally, but unless I'm forgetting something, this is their first true time travel episode, isn't it, Matt?
I believe so, yeah. I think they've kind of resisted until they finally had to do something time travel related. And it won't be the last time either, so...
Yeah, it's a science fiction show. You have to do time travel episodes, right? So it's part of it's a requirement, right? But some of the background of this episode is the writers Howard Gordon and David Greenwald. They wrote the screenplay in 1 week, but it was very intense, and they apparently spent several 15-hour days hashing out this story. And they had some other help as well from John Sheehan, Frank Sponitz, and Ken Horton. So this episode had a lot of hands in it, and that might explain some of the things we see in this episode. Now, speaking of Smallville, right? We have a familiar actor in this episode, don't we? Matt, Hiro Kanagawa, Principal Kwan, makes an appearance.
Oh yeah. Yes, I forgot about that.
Doctor. Yeah, he's the doctor now, and this is his second appearance on the X-Files. He was previously mentioned. He previously appeared in Firewalker. Back in season 3, and he also met a terrible end there. So he loves to die on the X-Files, and he appears after this as well. So he is one of those staple, Canadian actors who just appears in a lot of this genre TV. So good to see a familiar face.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, I completely forgot until you mentioned it.
Well, and then in the episode itself, right? Gordon and Greenwald, the writers, they were apparently inspired by an article in Scientific American about time travel and quantum physics, and the real crux of spark of an idea here was thinking about Oppenheimer, right? Whose work led to the atomic bomb, and how he regretted, the devastation it caused, and even complained to Harry Truman, President of the United States, who ordered the atomic bombings of Japan, about those. So basically, the elevator pitch is scientist invents an incredible technology, doesn't like how it gets used, so tries to go back in time and stop its invention. So a pretty solid pitch, I would say, huh?
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
Now, and I don't know if they got their mind quite around it, and we'll talk about it through here, right? So David Duchovny has been quoted as saying that many of the episode's scenes were written during filming because, quote, no one could know if the audience understood what was happening. So there was a lot of hand, whenever you have that wall of writers, we didn't see it on screen, right? Because Gordon and Greenwald are the only two credited writers, but when you have behind the scenes, pretty much the entire writers room writing something, that tends to imply this is a tough, nut to crack. And they actually, during the last minute rewrites, they removed a lot of, quote unquote, useless characters and extra elements to tighten up the story. And they actually had a Stephen Hawking-esque scientist, in a wheelchair, which makes me think back to War of the Carpages. I can never say that. How do you pronounce that episode title?
With great difficulty.
Yeah. There you go. So I think that was a wise choice, though, because they had already kind of parodied Stephen Hawking in a parody episode, in a Darren Morgan episode last season. So to have like a real Stephen Hawking now analog would have been a little too on the nose and a little too, okay, kind of been there, done that. So, and yeah, I don't see how, I felt like this episode was pretty full of characters to begin with. I don't think we need it anymore. That's just my take on it.
Yeah, there's quite a few littered around anyway that, okay, narrows it down as the episode goes on, but I think they managed to trim a decent episode out of it, depending on, from the sounds of it. It kind of makes sense. If you start to think things logically and try to scully the episode, then it kind of breaks down a touch, but I don't think it's, I don't think it's bad at all. I do quite like it, and I think they managed to do something quite interesting, and there's a few interesting story twists that work quite well.
Yes. So I agree with you. I think it's a very solid premise, and I think my disappointment in the episode, and I still like it, don't get me wrong, but the fact that it's not like one of my, like, oh, you got to see this one, right? It's not when you revisit a lot. It's because I feel like that they could have done more with this premise, because it's a really interesting premise. Like, kudos to them on that. But they don't really stick the landing. I think they were there, like, probably 70% of the episode, and then we get to the climax, it gets a little, well, we'll get into it, right? But on a scale of 10, I would probably give this episode 6 out of 10. What about you, Matt?
I remember when I first watched it, I would probably have given it an 8. But I think when I rewatched it yesterday, and I think I jumped to try and speak on it because it's time travel, because I love time travel as a concept. When I started rewatching it, I kind of started picking holes in it that I probably didn't notice the first time I watched it, but that was a few years ago. And I'm going to drop down to a 7.
Okay. So 6 for me, 7 for you. But let's get into it. Synchrony. Synchrony is the 19th episode of the X-Files 4th season. It aired on April 13th, 1997. It was written by Howard Gordon and David Greenwald, directed by James Charleston. It gets a 7.9 out of 10 on IMDb. So we open with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and we have an old man running in a park, and we focus on the clock. So it's like, okay, this is going to be important. All right, this is like Chekhov's clock or something, right? They're showing us what time it is. This is going to come into play, right? And so he's running, and then we see these other guys kind of arguing about, just having an argument about research and revealing information and this kind of thing. And then the old guy runs up to him, and he's like, "You have to stop him from crossing the street. We have to go back to the future, Marty." Right? That's what. That's just, knowing what the episode is. That's the kind of mindset I put to it. But he gets in a scuffle with these guys, and then a campus security comes in and takes him away. So what did you think of this introduction here of our old man?
I thought it was quite effective because it's an interesting premise. If you've watched the episode ahead of time, you can kind of connect the dots straight away, and you can kind of see what's happening. But it's quite interesting. The X-Files hasn't done time travel before, so naturally, old man saying someone's going to die, naturally, where would your mind immediately go? Perhaps someone who's psychic. Perhaps this is a more dramatic version of Darren Morgan's episode, and the name has suddenly gone out of my head, the one with Peter Boyle. And
By Bruckman's Final Repose, right?
Yes, and that's pretty much every member of the X-Cast community gunning for me for getting the name of that, for getting the name of that episode, but I tried to figure out at what point the first viewer would recognise it's time travel, but here you don't get that impression. You just think it's another madman, another psychic. The audience has already been predisposed to look at perhaps premonitions of death.
Yeah, he does say he's gonna get hit by the bus at exactly 11:46, and that makes you think, oh, okay, you're right. I didn't really think about that. This could just be a clairvoyant guy. So yeah, because I'm rewatching it, I'm like, okay, so I want to see if this tracks, who this guy is from the future and whatnot. But yeah, it does work, and then he gets carted away by campus security, and then these two guys we had seen, they're still, they're not friends still. They're still being argumentative. He's like, they go their separate ways, right? But then the first guy, Jason, as we come to know his name to be, and also the old man knows his name as well. Right? So that's what kind of flags you, how did he know my name? Right? And so this kind of sticks with Jason. He's going down the street, looks at his watch, he sees what time it almost is. He sees the other guy struggling with all these papers. He sees a bus coming, he sees it all playing out before him. So he rushes to save him. his friend, and doesn't get there in time. You know, the other guy drops his papers, they get all wet, which is terrible. Right? That's like everybody's worst nightmare. You're carrying books and papers, and you drop them like puddles of water, right? But this bus is just going along, hits the guy, and then the bus driver comes out, and he's like, "You killed him. You pushed him in front of the bus." And I was like, "Really? What is that? That's not what happened." So,
I mean, I had to rewind it because I think I was making notes and I missed that bit, and I couldn't actually remember. I had to rewind just to check whether he did actually push him. But I think it's quite weird for the bus driver to think of. And then again, though, I mean, if you saw it from the bus driver's point of view, perhaps...
Well, you see a guy standing there yelling, and then the other guy is in front of a bus. I guess, don't jump to conclusions, is basically what I'm saying.
Yeah. I want to point out as well, the actor who played, I think it's Lucas, his name was. I can't remember what his name is, but to me, he'll always be Teb from Galaxy Quest.
Oh, he's in Galaxy Quest. Okay.
Yeah, he's the one who like idolizes Alan Rickman's character, Dr. Lazarus, and he treats him as like he kind of dismisses him, but then gets killed, and that's it's his death that kind of makes.
Oh, he's like, I grab Thor's hammer, you will be. Okay.
Yeah, he's the one. His death actually
galvanizes Alan Rickman's character to go into it. Oh, okay, yeah, he really. Okay, I see it now. Okay, he's one of the aliens. I know he was a familiar face, but I didn't really dig into his IMDb because he's a one scene character here.
But yeah, no, because I love that film. I love that film so much.
And much like in Galaxy Quest, he dies here. So setting off the chain of events for this episode. So we cut to the credits, we come back, and Mulder is giving Scully the case file on this. And I love Scully's reaction. This would be my reaction most of the time if I was Scully. She's like, why am I looking at this? Right? It's like, because we have a guy who's died, we have a potential motive, which they established because the research and their argument beforehand. We have a bus driver's testimony, right? I mean, everything seems to line up pretty well. But the X-Files element, right, is that this old man ran up and warned them about the exact time, even knew his name, and Scully tries to make a wisecrack, like, oh, does this old man have a scythe and a black robe, trying to act like he's the Grim Reaper. He's like, no, he was actually picked up by campus security. So take that, Scully. Right?
Sometimes I think Scully does try and play devil's advocate a bit too sarcastically, if you get what I mean. I do kind of have to wonder, like, I'm not sure how Mulder got information on this. Was it? I don't remember if it was mentioned, but I'm just wondering whether he just watches like random interviews, or if anything, just he's slightly out of order, it gets thrown his way.
The show does a good enough balance where it's like sometimes you see them assign this for a specific reason, or like, oh, well, it involves a federal agent or something, right? That's usually how they tie it in. But a lot of times he just has this case file, or somebody told him about it, or he read about it in the National Enquirer, right, or whatever. But I went with it here. They didn't explicitly say like where he got this from or who brought it to his attention. But I'll roll with it. And the only lead, you would think, oh well, this guy was taken custody by campus security, right? It's like, let's go talk to that security guard. Well, that guy is dead. So twist. And they go to the morgue, I guess, and the doctor there is like, well, we didn't know whether to start cutting him up or burning him or what. And they're like, what are you talking about? And they reveal under a sheet that this man has been frozen. He's just basically been blasted by Mr. Freeze's freeze gun. And his temperature is at negative 15 degrees Fahrenheit and cooling. We get one of those great ear thermometers. Did you ever have one of these ear thermometers when you were a kid? I love those.
Yeah. I think we never had one personally, but we always had to, like, the GP would just like stick their like thing in the ear and go, yep, fine.
See, those were cool because when I was a little kid, we had like the underarm thermometer or the mouth thermometer, and then when we get advanced to the ear thermometer, I was like, okay, this is nice. Like, this is not as inconvenient as sticking this in.
We're not a kid anymore. We're not a kid anymore. We graduated to the ear thermometer.
That's right. We're big time now. Scully, very observant. She does notice. She's like, and you think it's a clue. She's like, it looks like something. It was inserted into his ear, and the doctor's like, yes, it was this thermometer. And then she tests his temperature again. It's 8 degrees. So this is not just a case of like frostbite or something, because the theory is this guy, they found some alcohol under his car seat. Theory is he got drunk and like froze to death outside. Well, that doesn't track if his internal body temperature is still going down.
Yeah, and I think to Gillian Anderson's credit, I do quite like that her expressions are gradually kind of going from early dismissal to, okay, this is
genuine
actually
interest, yeah.
this is genuinely interesting. Like if anything, it's more this how possible this was, or how this has happened, and like her like gradual like intrigue and like bewilderment is like quite funny to watch actually. But it tracks as well. I mean, like it tracks with Scully as a character who there's at least something scientific for her to crack. And I think some of the better X-Files episodes kind of have that, where not that it doesn't do it all the time, but there's like a kind of dual personal mystery for them both to solve. I think Mulder's more interested in perhaps the old guy who somehow knew what was going to happen, whereas Mulder is the person who's more interested in the old guy who's saying, you're going to die at 11:46, whatever. Whereas Scully has now got hang on, how is this possible? This is scientifically fascinating to work on, and that's Scully's personal mini arc or mini mystery of the episode established. And it's quite interesting. I always find it quite interesting when the episode kind of does that, and it does it quite subtly. It doesn't really explicitly say this episode's going to be about these two things for these two characters. I quite like how it does that, because sometimes the X-Files does forget to kind of expand on the scientific, skeptical nature of it, and I think this episode has the dual storylines of the eventual reveal of time travel and this freezing agent working quite well together.
Now, Scully does theorize that perhaps he ingested some liquid nitrogen or something, and of course Mulder has a great one-liner. You see what happens when you drink and drive. It's like, thank you, Mulder, for continuing to make wisecracks in the morgue of dead bodies.
Oh, he's got a better one at the end of the scene as well. He goes, what do we do with him? We hope he keeps till Thanksgiving. Yeah,
exactly. So Mulder goes to visit Jason, and he's in one of these Law and Order interrogation cells, and he's talking to his girlfriend. Her name is Lisa, who is also a doctor, and Lisa is played by Susan Lee Hoffman, who actually played another character called Lisa, a scientist, in Outbreak. So I guess the mid '90s, she was really had the market cornered on doctors named Lisa. And then the actress who plays Jason, his name's Joseph Fuqua. He really doesn't have much of an IMDb to speak of. He doesn't even have a picture on his IMDb, but he did appear in shows like Chicago Hope, Becker, Profile, The Pretender. He was in a couple episodes of that. Now, he was in an episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Rocks and Shoals, which I will have to go rewatch that episode and see if I can find him, because he plays an ensign, and this is an episode where in Deep Space Nine, in the Dominion War arc, where the crew, they capture a Dominion ship and they crash on a planet, and he must have been part of the crew member there. So next time I watch that episode, I will keep an eye out for him. So those are our actors here.
Actually, I think if you Google Joseph Fuqua, I think his picture on Google is actually from Memory Alpha.
Okay, of his character on Deep Space Nine. Interesting. So.
Yeah.
But Mulder goes in here and he talks to Jason about what's going on. And Jason, I mean, he's very, like, I didn't kill him, but he also kind of admits that, like, okay, yeah, I might have falsified some research, some data on my research paper, and Lucas might have known about it, and he might have exposed me, so there is plenty of motive here, right? But then Mulder mentions the fact that the security guard, right, was frozen, and then Jason does not react well to this. He's like, is this some kind of joke? And Mulder's like, what are you talking about? Because Mulder doesn't know that their research involves cryobiology, and that's the big reveal of this conversation, right, Matt?
Yeah, so it kind of starts connecting with each other as well, yeah. So I quite like how that was revealed anyway. Quite early on as well. I mean, like, quite early on, I think we're about a quarter of the way through. Speaking
of revealing stuff, right, continuing the investigation of the corpse, Scully lets Mulder know that there are fingerprints on the corpse, and they are Nichols' fingerprints, who were also found inside the car. So, not looking good for Nichols. But to you, you're like, as the astute viewer of genre television at this point, you're like, oh, he must be the old man, right? I mean, if this is the point, right? I'm talking about, you said earlier, if you're a first-time viewer and you're trying to decide what category of weirdness this goes in, the old guy knowing when something was going to happen exactly at the right time with the same fingerprints as this young guy, to me, that says time travel.
Again, yes, but then with the casual X-Files viewer, do you think they might be going like, oh, father, or kind of shapeshifter? I mean, what I quite like is that time travel's still not out as a thing yet, and I think they're still kind of perhaps playing into other traps. I'm quite surprised that Mulder hasn't thrown out aliens yet, but I mean, considering if we're going to go...
Season 1, if this was Season 1, he'd be like, well, clearly it must be aliens.
Yeah.
Because even the episodes without aliens, they were like, well, we're supposed to do aliens in every show, right? We have to mention that. So at least they've moved past that by this time in the show, right?
Yeah, but again, I think it's still quite open. I mean, like, I think naturally you could assume that, well, I'm, again, casual viewer who perhaps isn't as au fait with science fiction as perhaps we are. I still think that it could be other things as well. So, like, I mean, we've had shapeshifters before in the show. Again, it could be that. I mean, it still doesn't scream time travel to me.
Right. I'll give you this, though. There a lot of episodes I get frustrated with. It's, like, so clear to the viewers what's going on. And Mulder and Scully are, like, 3 steps behind, you know. Thinking about shapes, for example. You know, something like that. I was like, okay, it's a werewolf. Hello. This is not the case. I think it's still intriguing here. But I'm just saying, as you can see where, like, okay, this is the first reveal of, like, okay, this is probably, might be some time travel involved here. But you're right. It's not a slam dunk. It's not a, come on, guys, wake up. This is what it is. But it is revealing a lot at the top of the episode that you can kind of trace back later. So it
tracks completely, though, when you look back on it. I mean, when you're watching it a second time, it tracks perfectly.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So then we get Henry Kanagawa, who I mentioned earlier.
Principal Kwan.
Principal Kwan is here. He's Dr. Yanichi, and I might refer to him as Principal Kwan or Dr. Yanichi as the conversation here continues. But he's come to check in at a hotel, and apparently there's no reservation under that name. But then the old man shows up. He's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, doctor. There's been a mix-up. You're at a different hotel. Let me bring you over here." So clearly this is a setup of some kind. He was not actually asked to come here. The old man to set this whole thing up is what we're led to believe, right, Matt?
Yeah, the bit I get confused on slightly was whether he in the original timeline, whether he actually turned up there at that time.
I don't think so. And that's I have some timeline issues, and that kind of inspired my problems with this episode. Kind of later on, when we get to, like, the picture and when this happened and why he did what when. But based off the fact that the doctor was there. And, like, he was told, like, oh, hey, come here, there's a reservation for you at this hotel, and it didn't exist, and the old guy had to come and say, oh, hey, no, sorry, you're over here. To me, that implies that that's something that the old man set up for the doctor. So that's been my take. Because then he brings him back to another hotel room, and they have a conversation. He says, oh, I wanted to thank you. Everything was possible. So much of my work was because of you. And the old guy's kind of confused. But then... because apparently the crux of his research is he invented some water for sugar component that allowed the freezing process to work better. That was this doctor's key contribution. And then he pours him. It's a nice misdirect in this episode too, because the old man pours the doctor a drink of water, and Principal Kwan looks at the water thinking, oh God, something must be wrong with this, because the old man's acting real creepy and stuff. But it's a misdirect, because then he grabs his arm and stabs him with this device, which we learn to figure out what it is later, which instant freezes him. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I quite like that. It's not the first time the plot kind of twists on itself as well, to the point where I was actually quite surprised on my rewatch.
You thought he had poisoned him or something in his drink, but no, he stabbed him in the arm instead.
Yeah, and there's a couple of other times something like that happens as well. But no, I quite like that. I quite like the direction of it, because you're still getting a kind of drip feed of information of the plot and how things all connect together. And particularly when he's talking about water and, like, the sugar properties or whatever it was he was talking about. Quite like how that was, like, kind of misdirected. And then suddenly, like, oof, he gets stabbed in his hand.
So that brings us out to commercial. We come back and we see the Principal Kwan, Dr. Yanichi, right, for all you X-Files fans. He's frozen in the bathroom there, and Mulder and Scully are there, and they're the problem now is, though, they're like, there's no security cameras in any of these places. Like, maybe it's because I live in the 21st century now, and this is like the mid 90s. But I would think there would at least be some, like, closed circuit TV, because they keep trying to think that, like, oh, well, is there even an old man? You know, I mean, Scully thinks there's not even an old man. That's just some kind of story at this point. But the hotel clerk did confirm there was an old man, so that at least ties in the gutter for him. That would solve a lot of issues, because they do say they're going to do a composite sketch of this guy to figure out what he looks like, and we see what it is later. And I have some thoughts on that, but
yeah, I'm actually thinking about that. I did actually remember thinking actually watching it, going, hang on, is there any CCTV, particularly if it's what, 1996? Is it?
7.
97. I would have thought at least the foyer would have had some kind of CCTV.
Yeah, near the door. Like, oh, here's this guy. He came in. They left together. That kind of thing. So anyway, but it's not really a crucial plot element, I guess, because now they establish that this guy exists. Because for a while, Scully thought, oh, it's just the young guy just, making up stories. Like, no, there's a physical other person at work here.
So actually, in this point, this is probably the point to bring up now, is that I think one of the episodes failing in terms of the rules of time travel.
Yes.
What kind of time travel are we dealing with? Because what I think the older Jason does, theoretically, should stop him from actually killing Principal Kwan.
There are many points in the episode we can dig into this, but at some point I do want to go deep into this in this discussion. But in this point, you're right. If this is clearly not the Back to the Future rules, right? Where it's like if time continues on its current course, because later on we find like there's a picture of Dr. Yanichi and Lisa and Jason all together celebrating their success, right? Which is from as they determine about 5 to 10 years in the future, right? So after he has done what he's done to the Doctor here, that picture should change, right? Should be just the two of them or just disappear or something, right? So, but also, it's not like closed loop predestination paradox time travel, because you think about like the Terminator, the first one, right? The first Terminator, perfect closed time loop, right? Any time traveler just causes what they meant to cause or stop or whatever, right? Like they had always time travel. They were always part of history. That's clearly not the thing here either.
The situation, the example I always like to give is that when I try and explain it to people is that if anyone has ever managed to do time travel and goes back to kill Hitler, the only time they were ever successful was in that bunker.
I like that. So yeah, I like that. So we're gonna bring that up a little bit later when we talk about in our post discussion here about time travel. But you and I are in alignment there about how time travel should work. But you're right. Whenever you introduce time travel into a story, you need to establish the rules of time travel, and that is a weakness of this episode. Because I don't know what the stakes are. Because if he keeps changing the past, but he's still around doing his thing, then it's the grandfather paradox, right? He's gone back and killed his own grandfather at this point, right? So to speak, and yet he's still around doing more stuff. So, but guess what? Dr. Kwan. Now I've mixed Principal Kwan and Dr. Yanichi together now, but he's not dead. He's just on ice. And we'll pick that up in a second, right? That was a surprise to me rewatching because I kind of forgot. I'm like, oh yeah, well he died.
Yeah,
I thought he burst in the flame though. I'm confused.
Because again, that was like I paused the episode, started typing my notes about, and just started reading up on a bit of like the grandfather paradox and everything, thinking, oh, so we're doing the bit where you can change the future, etc., etc., etc. And then it goes, oh, he might not be dead, and I'm like, oh. But then he bursts into flames later on.
The reason they get to the second death of Dr. Yanichi is they go see Lisa at the Research Institute, and they it's kind of similar like Jason, where they kind of give her some files and like, did this look familiar to you? And it's the signature readings of these compounds, and she's like, how did you get this, right? Because obviously from her perspective, this is top secret information that only they should have, and yet these government agents are coming and showing it to her, and she reveals that it's a catalyst and it's a rapid freezing agent. So again, we don't know how this connects to time travel yet, but that's what it is. But it doesn't exist yet, and they're like, well, could Jason have synthesized some of this because it's being used and it's killing people right now? She's like, no, there's no way. We're like 5 to 10 years away from this even being beyond theoretical. And they mentioned that one man is dead, another one has just been 2 men are dead. And she asked about when the other attack happened. She's like, well, just a couple hours ago. Why does it matter? And then she realized, well, because he could still be alive, right?
And then that was like when I was just started writing the notes on time travel, and that happened. I'm like, oh, okay, I didn't expect that. And then it's, oh, okay.
Maybe not.
Maybe not.
So they do an impressive job of unfreezing him. It's kind of like when Robin gets frozen by Mr. Freeze in the Batman comics and movies and TV shows, right?
Yeah.
They put him in some tank and he just unfreezes, and it's that simple, right, Matt?
It's easy. Yeah, you just defrost it, just like sticking him into a microwave and just hitting defrost.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I always say, I'm like, people say, would you rather burn to death or freeze to death? And I always say, well, I'd rather freeze to death because in theory I could be, thawed out, right? But it depends on how you get frozen. So it's a very scientific way of unfreezing you. It's kind of like, people going to cryo-freeze all the time. Like, I'm surprised they didn't tie in some kind of cryogenic, like, life extension thing. I know they had done that in, I guess, Roland back in season 1, right, with the brains. But that's something that Fringe gets into a lot, actually. But the X-Files doesn't really do the cryonics thing. as much as you might expect. But anyway, all that being said, you can only have one or two crazy sci-fi elements in your story. Any more than that, it really starts to get bloated. But they unthaw Dr. Yanichi, and you think, oh wow, okay, he's gonna be fine. The timeline has been staying on course. Timeline is correcting itself, right? But no, because they take him out of the tub, and Lisa actually says, after this happens, perhaps if we left him in the tub, we could have saved him. But they take him out of the tub, and then his temperature continues to raise and raise and raise to the point he spontaneously combusts. And just literally flames, and it's a horrible, horrible way to die. And again, this is what made me think of my whole, burn to death or freeze to death. Again, I would rather freeze to death. That seems more peaceful than burning to death because he's not flailing about. I don't know. What about you, Matt?
Yeah, I think I'd freeze to death. There's no question.
Because your body shuts down slowly. It seems more peaceful than, being burned alive in agony and flailing around until you die. So that's my take on it. But what a horrible... Not once, but twice they have to kill Hiro Kanagawa in this episode. So I wonder what his overall death count on the X-Files is, Matt.
I'm not sure. It's 2 at the moment.
Well, 3, because he died in Firewalker and twice here. So whoever picks up the next Hiro Kanagawa episode, let's keep tabs on how many times he dies in the X-Files.
Yeah,
I know
X-Files
for a fact
tally
he dies... X-Files tally board, that's right. Add it to the tally board, guys. I know for a fact he dies in the season 10 premiere because he's part of the lab that has the spaceship in My Struggle 1, and that lab gets blown up. So, he's one of the head scientists on that. So he dies at least 4 times the X-Files, if not more. Keep your eyes out, listeners. We shall continue. So that's it for Principal Kwan pouring out for you. And he's dead for real this time. But then we get the old man, right? And he's following Lisa around. And this is when I first noticed. I noticed it earlier in the episode, but I did want to mention it. I really like the music in this episode, like the incidental music, I should say. It has a little bit of character to it, and it's not your normal, ominous, dark, Mark Snow X-Files tones. There's just something to it I enjoy that kind of carried the action, I think. What did you think of the music? Did you notice it, Matt?
I didn't, actually. I'm not one. I think it's just very rare for me to notice music. I think there's only been about 2 or 3 times in my television watching experience where the music in the background is, I've noticed it, and I've deliberately noticed it. One is Buffy, the end of season 2, and the second one that I can think of is when Peter Capaldi regenerates into Jodie Whittaker in Doctor Who. And that's the only time I've ever really noticed the music. It might have been because it was really loud in the mix, but...
Well, I think it's because it's recurring in the episode. It's boom, 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 boom. I don't know. I can't even rehum it here. It's not when you go home and you hum. But watching it does kind of carry through a lot of the action and kind of gives the episode its own identity for this kind of stuff. So I did just want to make a shout out to Mark Snow in that regard. But the old man is clearly following Lisa on a bus. She ducks into a library. He plays it off really well though, because she goes into a door and waits behind there for him. He goes in the door and he just keeps walking. And she's like, "Why are you following me?" And she's behind him and he says, "Well, it looks like you're following me." So I think he plays it off pretty well, doesn't he, Matt?
Yeah, it's goes, oof, I know, I'm just walking here. Then again, because we don't get a full grasp of what exactly he's doing. My impression at this point, when I'm trying to connect the dots myself, was that he's gone back in time to prevent her death, which is what I initially thought it might have been.
So a true Terminator time travel situation.
Yeah, and whether the whole he's stopping the whole research because it led to her dying or something. But then it's not at this point. I think it's later on where he said isn't it her that sends him back, I think, or
right. This is the scene where he's like, "I came here to kill you, but I couldn't do it," and then he walks off, and that's the act break there, which is an interesting revelation. And at this point, you're kind of like, okay, this must be Jason from the future, right? I mean, I think everyone would be on board at this point. So we're going to stop calling him the old man. He's Jason. He's old Jason. And so let's talk about old Jason, the actor, for a second. Michael Ferriman. And I thought to myself, this guy looks familiar. Who is he? I've seen him in something. What shows do I watch around this time? Who could he be? And the thing I know him best for is from Firefly. He's the head boss who hires this.
Is it Niska?
Yeah. Where he's torturing. they hire him for the bank job, which they don't do, and they get in trouble, and they meet up with him a little later, and he captures them and tortures them. And I was like, man, that's a great bad guy. So yeah, Niska from Firefly, there he is.
Oh yes, I remember him now. Oh man, that's brilliant. Oh, that's a brilliant episode, Telly. Oh, I knew you'll recognise him from somewhere. I'm sure I recognise him from something else as well.
I mean, he also had supporting roles in Mulholland Drive and 13 Days, but I'll know him best as Niska from Firefly. So, but we come back from commercial, and then we see Mulder and Scully are talking to Lisa, and they've brought her the composite sketch of this guy, and they're like, "Is this him?" She's like, "Yeah." And apparently Lex Luthor has come from the future to kill these people. What did you think of this composite sketch? I thought it was kind of off.
I don't understand composite sketches. I mean, I've always, particularly in the 90s TV shows, I've always thought that if I was ever in a position to give someone a composite sketch, then they might as well just close the case, because they're not going to get... I've never understood how they work. I mean, like, unless they're just sat there for about 6 hours saying, no, his eyes are a bit less like that. No.
Well, as I understand it, that's how it works. I mean, there are people who are composite sketch artists, and they're, intuitive and excellent artists, and they just listen to people, and they just keep shaking. Now, my thing would be, if you ever used a pencil, you got a hell of an eraser if you're continuously altering, the sketch. Like, in this day and age with the computers, they even do this on the X-Files sometimes, where it's like they have the whole sketch. I think, what is it? It's not Born Again. It's not, the one with the little girl who's possessed by the dead cop, right, in season 1. Resurrection. I don't know. There's so many titles in season 1, which I said about people coming back from the dead. They're interchangeable. But the one with the little girl who got killed by his partner was dirty and married the guy's wife, and he was dead, so he came back as a little girl. I believe that episode in particular, they're sitting at a computer and does he have a big mustache? Did he have a big nose? The computer is changing it. To me, that's a lot more logical than sitting here sketching for hours and hours. So
there's something like that in is it RoboCop, where he there's a scene in RoboCop where the original RoboCop film, where he just sticks a spike into a computer and interfaces and gets a composite sketch.
I remember he sticks the spike in the computer to get, I think, calls up his files. I don't remember the composite sketch though, no, but I know what you're talking about.
Unless I'm getting confused with Batman, I think, because I'm pretty sure that it's either RoboCop or Batman, where one of the games in the ocean software tie-in games, the third level was you having to do something to do with faces.
It's basically Guess Who on a very much more serious scale.
Yeah.
But no, this is I agree with you. I think it's a very hard profession for sure, and you see,
I would never be able to do it.
If you ever watch Unsolved Mysteries, I know Tony's a big Unsolved Mysteries fan. We've talked about it, but you see these composite sketches at the end of these, here's a composite sketch, right? They look awful. They look so ridiculous. And sometimes there's an update to the Unsolved Mysteries story. They show the actual person. I'm like, that was way off. How did you even catch that person? But anyway, that would be the case here. This is a comical Unsolved Mysteries sketch area on the
X-Files. Whereas, particularly nowadays, or ones that are period pieces, it just looks like someone's just stuck a publicity photo of the actor or a headshot, and then just put on put Photoshop pencil filter on them, and then printed it out again. He goes, a compositive artist, Mr. P. Shoppers.
P. Shoppers, this guy. That reminds me, because we'll just keep bringing up Smallville, right? But Smallville episode Relic, where Jor-El is in Smallville back in the 60s, there's a composite sketch of him. Looks exactly like Tom Welling. This is the best composite sketch artist ever.
Yes.
It's hard enough, and that's the thing. It's hard enough if you're an artist and you're staring at someone to draw them perfectly, right? But let's not forget, this person is not sitting in front of them. They have to put this together from description. So TV and movies definitely exaggerate composite sketches. That's why I say go to Unsolved Mysteries. It's on Amazon Prime right now, much like the X-Files, by the way, if you haven't checked it out, everyone. They have composite sketches at the end, and you can see what the real-world composite sketches are based off the person. But comparing looks and stuff, let's talk about this for a second. Do you think Michael Fairman looks anything like Joseph Fuqua? Do you buy him as an old Jason in this episode?
No.
Exactly. Well, clearly what they do is I assume, right, old Jason is kind of the linchpin in the show. So you cast Michael Fairman first, and then what you should do is you should go, okay, I need someone that looks like a younger version of this guy. Because younger Jason really has almost nothing to do in this episode. He is just an afterthought, which is another criticism I have, kind of. But you just cast someone that looks like him and then go with that. But maybe that's part of the twist. Right? Because he's 40. He established he's 40 years in the future. So say he's 30 now. He's 70 then. I don't know. you don't change. Movies and TV shows are very deceptive on how much someone changes in appearance over the course of their life because of all these different actors they have portray characters. I think they should have kind of reverse engineered the casting. Maybe they tried, and that's the best they could find up there in Canada. I don't know.
We have to give, again, it's the benefit of the doubt in terms of looking like them. I mean, okay, you wouldn't have thought they're the same person, not in a million years, but you gotta have some kind of suspension of disbelief. That term, suspension of disbelief, it's the linchpin of science fiction in general. But, I think you've gotta have to have something. I mean, you wouldn't have, looking at them, they don't look like each other in the slightest, but you have to allow it.
Well, during this conversation, the cops come up to Mulder and Scully and they say, "Hey, we got a tip. We think this old man's staying in this hotel over here. We're gonna go check it out." And so Mulder and Scully leave, but Lisa overhears this, so file that away for later. Mulder and Scully, also in this scene, by the way, Lisa reveals that she falsified the data to get the grant. So young Jason is protecting her by not talking about it. So, but that plot point, I don't think really mattered in the grand scheme of things, Matt, because maybe that's just more misdirection because that has nothing to do with the plot that's going on. Like, either one of them could have faked the data, right?
Yeah, it has nothing to do with it. I actually forgot it happened until you mentioned it.
Mulder and Scully, they go into this hotel room. Old Jason is not there. There's really not much there at all, but they find this photo, right? In classic Back to the Future fashion, we have to have a photo to gauge what's going on. But again, talking about the time travel rules, this photo hasn't changed at all. It's a picture from 5 to 10 years in the future with Principal Kwan, Lisa, and Jason, and they're cheering something. They've obviously, they've made an accomplishment, they made a breakthrough, and they're like, when will this picture would have been taken? And Mulder's like, well, she said 5 to 10 years, so I assume then. But the photo hasn't changed, the doctor is dead now. So I don't know what time travel rules we're working with. To kind of call back to our conversation earlier, huh?
But what's quite interesting is that, I can't remember at this point, I know it's brought up at the very end, but it seems that from an earlier conversation, Scully has actually written a paper about time travel or the existence or the debunking it. I can't fully remember.
He brings it up here because Mulder starts, giving his Mulder leaps of logic. He says, "Well, the old man is Jason," and then he kind of quotes time travel, like it's theoretically possible and all that. And he's quoting like Scully, one of her research papers, and he says, "Quote: You were a lot more open-minded when you were a youngster." So I just think it was funny because he's basically saying, "Hey, you said this is possible," and she says, "Yes, but you also forgot that based off quantum physics and heat and force and all that, organic human could not survive the trip, and it's all theoretical." So they're arguing about the time travel thing, but see, this is where the time travel really starts to go off the rails for me because he starts to say. Because Mulder explains it, but it still doesn't make any sense. And this is what David Duchovny was talking about when he said, "Yeah, we were rewriting scenes as we shot them just to make sure they kind of made sense." And I think this is one of those cases because he says, if old Jason doesn't come back in time, Lucas doesn't get hit by the bus. So then young Jason is exposed for his false information. Therefore, there's no photo and there's no success. But he did get hit by the bus, and there is a photo. You know what I'm saying? Like, it falls apart for me. What did you take of that, Matt?
Exactly. I mean, I'm trying to get my head around, what it says. So I'm going off the goof section of the X-Files wiki.
Excellent. Excellent resource.
Yeah. Scully stated in her thesis that one universe can only produce one outcome. From that, Mulder believes that history cannot be changed. And in that, in the end, time travel will be invented. That's
what they say at the end of this episode, correct.
So does that mean that Mulder doesn't believe in time travel?
He believes in time travel the way we do. They can only become part of history.
So in other words, predestination. So that Mulder believes that, and then whereas Scully doesn't believe that it's possible, which I think there's a very, very big missed opportunity here, particularly with Scully being the scientist. I mean, is it that much of a stretch that she could think that it was theoretically possible? She says later on that she was 23 years old when she wrote that, but it might have been a lot more interesting if perhaps they played on their beliefs of time travel a lot more, because it's quite interesting to think that Mulder doesn't believe that time can be changed, and whereas we never fully get a grasp, or if we have, I've already forgotten it, of what Scully's final line on time travel would be.
Well, they seem to be in alignment of there can be time travel, but then they can't change anything. And then to that I say, well, then what is the point of, why does it matter? if they're from the future or not, if they can't change history, right? But you're right, a true debate of the both of them, of like if they both believe in time travel, but have different interpretations of it, of like what are the repercussions of that? What does it truly mean? So yeah, I agree with you. That is a big missed opportunity.
It is, as you said, it starts to unravel a bit because it never fully gets a grasp of what it's trying to do.
Well, to me, and tell me if I'm wrong here, it seems to me that old Jason wanted Lucas to get hit by the bus.
Yeah.
Because he sets that chain of events into motion. But then, if that didn't if old Jason had not been there, would Lucas still have got hit by the bus or not? Because if he doesn't get hit by the bus, actually you're right. See, the episode is confusing because he says to Lisa, old Jason, I came here to kill you, but I couldn't do it. Maybe he meant in that moment, right? Because if he come back in time, he tried to get young Jason to save Lucas from getting hit by the bus. Had Lucas not died, Lucas would have exposed Jason and Lisa's experiment, their inaccurate experiment data, and then the research would not have progressed. Therefore, time travel would not have been possible. So he keeps failing, and then he keeps trying to kill more people? Because that's Mulder's analysis later.
So hang on, does this mean... Okay, I'm getting confused. Okay, I'm confused now. I'm trying to process what I've just watched. So, in the original timeline, Lucas, or Ted from Galaxy Quest, didn't die. No, but he didn't, no. But he didn't because in that photo, because Lucas is in that photo. He's not Jason.
No, that's Jason, Lisa, and Principal Quan.
Okay, yeah, ignore me. Exactly
this is the episode. This is the big problem in the episode because he's like, "Oh, well, he didn't get hit by the bus," and then the photo. I'm like, "No, you guys don't understand. Like, he was always going to get hit by the bus, right?" Old Jason, like the episode misunderstands itself, I think, and that might be a symptom of the rewriting and a lot of writers writing it, which I mentioned earlier.
So in other words, then old
what's
Jason.
What's the plan?
Yeah,
right. So his initial plan, he is doing this on the fly. That is my understanding, right? So he shows up. He thinks, okay, if I can keep Lucas from getting hit by that bus, then me and Lisa our people will get killed and our research will not continue. That will solve time travel from happening, right? But he was unsuccessful. He still got hit by the bus. I'm like, okay, well, let me kill this other doctor, right? Well, then I guess he decides, okay, I didn't kill Lucas, so now I have to kill everyone in the picture. Professor Quan, the doctor, whatever his name is, himself and Lisa. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah. Okay, I think it's making more sense now, yes.
But the episode does not explain it properly. That is what I'm getting at. I think we both agree.
Tracks. It does track, actually. And for some reason, I honestly thought it was Lucas that was in that photo.
They are kind of a couple of generic-looking white guys with similar receding hairlines, but it's Jason. So
if anyone's listening and their head is beginning to hurt, I'm so sorry.
Don't blame us. Don't kill the messenger. Okay, so
yes.
But anyway, so Lisa has gone to old Jason's hotel room. He reveals that he's from 40 years in the future because he's like 30 years ago, 10 years from now. I thought that was a good line. Could kind of establish where he's from, but not in clunky exposition. He explains that Lisa meets other scientists and they work together and they discover tachyons and time travel's possible, but only at absolute zero and only for a few seconds. But her research she kind of unlocks a lot of the, she gets an inspiration and unlocks a lot of the roadblocks to time travel, which makes it possible. And that's why he came to kill her, but he said he couldn't do it. So they kind of have a moment, she realizes it's Jason, and I can buy this. This is his girlfriend, presumably his wife in the future. If you went back in time and your mission was to like kill your wife, would you do it? I mean, I see how the guy's conflicted because he didn't kill her earlier, but here he does. He stabs her with that device, and she freezes on the floor.
Again, that's another quite a shock as well, because I think I was still, I don't know why I still thought it might have been him trying to stop things from happening to prevent her death, but...
Well, I mean, that's what I had assumed at first, too. Like, when the first time I watched it, I was like, oh, I get it. He's from the future to save his wife from dying at a young age. So, like, that's like time travel. That's like the time travel, the Time Machine remake from 2002 with Guy Pearce, right? Like, that's a good, inspiration to go back in time and save somebody's life that you love. By the way, I'm just going to say this, guys. Fringe did an episode called The White Tulip, very similar to this. Way better. Okay, so Mulder has gone to he bails out Jason from jail this point because he needs him to come to the lab because Lisa is there being attempting to resuscitate her based off what they did with Dr. Yorochi earlier. Scully has learned the mistake and from taking they took him out of the tank after they resuscitate her. They need to put Lisa back in, right? So that's the process that's going on right now. But Mulder's driving there with young Jason. He tells him that about time travel and all that. And Jason's like, oh, that's science fiction. And then Mulder explains, like, oh, quantum theory. And it's kind of the show, like, justifying, like, hey, guys, this is possible, right? But it's just more exposition. And really, like, again, young Jason, he's just a nothing character here, right? I mean, I don't know. He felt like he was just a plot device and not a three-dimensional character, in my opinion.
I still think that we still don't know much about him overall, including from the older version. I mean, the old version then starts talking about, we'll start talking about, like, how the world has changed and like I that's when I started putting stuff into my own headcanon about what exactly he means. But actually, question while I'm thinking about it, you know when he says that the world has changed 30 odd years down the line and doesn't go into specifics, do you think he's referencing 2012, the alien invasion?
There it is. This episode is the crux of the X-Files mythology, Matt. We have unlocked it. This is why they don't come in 2012, because of the events of this episode. Brilliant. Chris Carter's a genius.
It's all connected.
Very good, very good. Well, I want to get back to that, because he does have a couple lines which I find very interesting, which I felt like they really could have fleshed out and kind of wasted the potential of this episode in that front. But they get to the lab, there's a handprint, right? And as soon as I saw that, right, even first watching, I was like, okay, this is going to be how the old guy gets in. The handprint. So young Jason and Mulder show up. They do the handprint. He's like, wait, are you Dr. blah, blah, blah? Well, it says you're already here. So we know old Jason's in the building. That's a good way to do it. He tells young Jason to go to the lab with Scully because they're resuscitating Lisa. But instead of that, young Jason goes to find old Jason because Mulder starts, snooping around, and he finds a convenient research assistant who knows everything about this project, who can, he's like, oh, show me all the files. And he does. But shocking twist, all the files are empty. They've been erased from the mainframe, Matt. I love 90s technology, the mainframe. Take a shot when anyone says mainframe in one of these shows. I love it. But anyway.
To be fair, I think Monday TV shows still don't understand IT. So I work in IT and sometimes it's hilariously bad. Yeah. It's not as bad as other examples that the X-Files will do in the future.
No, not at all.
Or what's done in the past. I mean, Ghost in the Shell. Is it Ghost in the Shell or Ghost in the Machine?
Ghost in the Machine.
Ghost in the Machine was like bad enough, but...
Why? Although I kind of like that episode, to be honest. But anyway.
Yeah. But to be fair, I mean, like, this is not like a fully IT-based technology one.
Just whenever I hear mainframe, I have to laugh. Like, it's such a staple. Nothing wrong with it here. It actually does track. But you think they'd have duplicate files, right? Somewhere. But they're being erased by old Jason. So young Jason goes to old Jason. He says, I wondered where I would go if I was here to stop myself. This is what I would do. And then we get our only bit of information about the future that old Jason comes from. He says, imagine a world without history. Everyone can know everything that will ever happen. And that sounds terrible, right? Time travel can be a terrible weapon. Because people, if time travel is readily available, right? People are rewriting history constantly. What is history? I mean, who knows, right? So that is a very dystopian, scary future, and that's why in a lot of these shows they have rules about like who controls the time travel devices and whatnot. So that alone kind of gives you the inspiration you need to stop it. But I wanted a lot more about that.
It's not crossed my mind until you just mentioned it. Does that mean there's more time travelers? So if time travel is possible, does that mean that the entire X-Files mythos is pretty much being messed around with?
Yeah, any continuity problems can be explained by this. This episode explains any problem you might ever have with the X-Files. So I'm so glad we're on it, Matt, because this is the most important episode of the show, in my opinion. Because any continuity problem can be explained by these time travelers, right?
Yeah, I mean, William's parentage.
Excellent. What happened to Doggett? Time travel. Right?
Yeah.
Erased.
Yeah.
So many. No, Sir Great Smoky Man. Why does he keep getting resurrected? Time travel. All right?
Yep.
I mean, it's very simple, guys. Time travel. A wizard did it, was old school. Time travel did it, is new school. So there you have it.
Oh, older Jason. That was his fault.
But no, all jokes aside, though, right? I think you look at movies like Looper or stories like A Sound of Thunder, right? Time travel is either illegal or controlled by a specific agency because, you cannot have irresponsible time travelers going around. You have the Temporal Prime Directive, as it comes to be known in Star Trek, right? You cannot have, just random people going through time, changing it, and reshaping the universe to their liking. So, that's a scary thought. You want to stop it. I want to know more about how things got to that point. I don't know. I just felt like there was so much potential here, and just these 2 lines of dialogue, and that's all we get. And I don't want to judge the episode for what it's not. I want to judge it for what it is. But I feel like they had a really cool concept here they could have gone into further.
No, I fully agree. It's just interesting to think what that future might be. I mean, they probably didn't have the forethought to think ahead at that time. But if this was done now, if this was a standalone episode that was done in 2019, so it would be on like CBS or something, then it'd definitely be saying something that would track with future plans for the show, or well, future plans for the season anyway. So he'll be hinting like, mysterious events that will come into play within 4 episodes in time for sweeps. And then again, now, 97, perhaps the continuity, I think continuity wasn't priority, so to speak. And I think perhaps one of the shows that would like change serialization in terms of like in how we see serialization, which would probably, personally and arguably, Buffy, which also David Greenwald, like second in command.
Really? I did not realize that. Okay.
I was going to mention it actually. David Greenwald, he was like second in command for Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and then was like show running Angel, the spin-off, which 2 of my all-time favourite shows of all time. It's probably one of the reasons I was really interested in this. Also, Howard Gordon, 24, another one of my favourite shows of all time. So this really got my interest.
This whole confrontation as well. This is the only time young Jason, like, he's a slightly interesting character to me. Because as far as he knows, Lisa is dying or has been killed, right? And they're trying to resuscitate her. And he's like, you figured out time travel. Tell me how to go back. I want to save her, you know? I'm like, oh, this is a good character motivation, right? For him right here at the 11th hour. But unfortunately, like, she's already been revived. Like, they've paced and edited this episode very poorly at the end. A side effect of the rewrites, I'm sure, and trying to crack everything. But by the point he's really fighting old Jason, like, tell me how I want to go back in time and save her, right? She's already alive, right? To the point where Mulder comes up to the glass, he's like, hey, Jason, she's alive, she's okay. You know? And then young Jason's like, she is? She's fine? Oh, wow. You know, see, he's just so, like, he stays stationary just long enough for old Jason to grab him. And, you know, a side effect, by the way, that's been going on this whole episode, old Jason's been injecting himself with the same device that he's been killing people with. It's like the super freezing technology, and it works on him probably because he was prepared for time travel or something, right?
Yeah.
Or the proper dosage or something, right?
Yeah, that bit isn't really fully explained either.
No.
So, like,
but they do explain that, like, the heat of time travel and the force and all that, humans can sustain it, but this device has the liquid or whatever you want to call it, the formula inside it to allow you to do so. So he has to keep injecting himself with this so he doesn't burn up like the other people do. Right? That was my interpretation of it, right? So when he doesn't, he's like, when young Jason finds him, he's like, hey, I don't have a lot of time. And because he hasn't taken his injection, obviously he's going to spontaneously combust in any minute, because this was a suicide mission for him, and a suicide mission for old him and young him, because he tells his younger self, it's better that we never were. He tackles him, they both erupt in the flames, and that's the end of both Jasons.
Also, I perhaps may have a bit of an issue with what exactly Mulder's doing here. So, like, he's trying to get in, he grabs a fire extinguisher, smashes a small hole into the glass, which I'm assuming means it is then brittle. If it was bulletproof glass, would he have managed to break into it with a fire extinguisher? Yeah,
Mulder is he's very passive. He's like, oh, okay, well, they're on fire now. I guess there's nothing else I can do. He just kind of watches them burn. And as we find out, you know, they find young Jason's body, but old Jason's body was so irrecoverably burned and there was nothing left to find. Because Scully's like, we need to put on an all points bulletin on the old man. And Mulder's like, you're not going to find him, Scully. I'm telling you. It was the old Jason. Because even when so Lisa is she's fine now, right? And this is some part of the rewrites, I bet. Scully expositions to her, yes, remember what you said earlier about taking him out of the tub and putting him back in? We did the same to you, and that's why we saved you. I'm like, yeah, we get it, you know.
Yeah.
But it just seemed very exposition heavy. And Lisa's like, it was Jason. And Scully says, yes, there's a lot of incongruous evidence. It's like, Scully, come on. So she is still, to the end, skeptical about this whole thing. But Lisa, she believes it was Jason and was from the future, and she knows what he told her about. You know, perhaps he told her too much about how she comes into to inventing this technology, right? But they cart her off on on the ambulance, and then they have the dialogue that you quoted earlier about Mulder quoting to her own paper about how time travel, timelines. There are multiple universes, but inside each universe, there's one timeline, which is an interesting kind of like, have your cake and eat it too version of all this. So, and then we cut to Lisa. She's presumably, time has passed. Back at the lab working, we see she's got the element X or whatever it is there, and working hard at it, and it ominously leaves us on Mulder's final lines about how, well, inevitably time travel will be possible and she will invent it. Although so much has changed, like the doctors have died, like she's the only one who's still alive to do it. Micro changes versus macro changes. You can fall into all these rabbit holes about time travel, but that's how we leave the episode. So
older Jason does say it's down completely to Lisa, who invents time travel or helps promote it. When you think about it, Dr. Kwan, Jason, they're more instrumental in the development of the cryogenesis freezing agent.
Which has already been done by this point, huh?
Yeah, which Lisa now has that compound of. So Mulder's kind of writing that time travel will still be invented because technically the people who have died have not been instrumental in the development of time travel. They were instrumental in the development of the freezing agent. Now, the people who would have developed that have died, but because the freezing agent has now gone to someone who might be able to understand it, which is Lisa, it's there ready to be used when she eventually meets that person in Zurich or whatever.
Are you saying she's reverse engineered the one he brought back from the future?
That's the impression I got.
Okay, so Terminator arm from Terminator 1 and the chip becoming the Terminator for Skynet and Terminator 2.
Yeah. What's quite clever, and I've only realised it now, is that the people instrumental in developing time travel are not actually involved or dead.
The element that she already has now from the future. Okay, all right.
Yeah, so basically what Jason should have done is older Jason should have gone to Zurich, find out and basically killed the wrong person.
Well, that's the thing, right? There's a great Twilight Zone, the new Twilight Zone episode about this. Not the 80s one, but the 2000s one. But it's called Cradle of Darkness. I'm going to spoil it for everybody now, right? So Katherine Heigl, in a pre-Grey's Anatomy role, she plays a time traveler, and they're like, hey, you're the only, like, the time travel is some kind of, the Twilight Zone has lots of angles of time travel, so I kind of like the anthology series of it all, right? And she is the only, like, personally, they found genetically compatible to go back in time, and she's going to go back in time and kill Hitler, right? To your point about killing Hitler, right? And she goes back in time. She becomes a housekeeper at Hitler's house, but when Hitler's a baby, right? So you're like, oh, is she going to kill this baby? Like the whole episode's pretty dark like this, right? And it's a good episode, and through a series of events, right? She ends up killing the baby Hitler, right? But they jump into a lake together, and she commits suicide and takes the baby with her, right? But then, like, the other housekeeper at Falder freaks out, right? And it's like, oh my god, like, because it's kind of established, like, Hitler's dad is like a hard ass, as you would expect, right? And she finds a gypsy woman with a baby and pays her to take the baby, and that's Hitler, right? So it's like, wow, like, it's either like, whoa, Hitler was always a gypsy, right? And so what a like a self-hating twist. Or the timeline will always find a way to replace itself and fix itself. So anyway, I thought that was a real cool twist and a great concept there. And it's like, this is what it's kind of the idea. It's like either it was always this way and we never knew it, or the timeline will find a way to correct itself. And I guess that's what this episode is trying to tell us. Exactly,
yeah. Then again, though, the changes in the timeline were done by an older version of Jason, which no longer exists. So he cannot go back in time to make the change.
The grandfather paradox, right? Well, I want to see that picture. What does that picture look like now?
Exactly. Unless then you start to delve into the realms, the Back to the Future model of alternate timelines being developed and everything, and then you're going into like Quantum Leap territory, which Quantum Leap is one of my favourite shows of all time. Is a bit loose and free with some of its time travel stuff, but that's not the point of that one. But the general twist with Quantum Leap is that history is changed and is constantly changed, but the micro changes which don't affect anything on a big level, with the exception of one or two times.
And I think that is what this episode, where it settles down on, is like micro changes have happened, but macroly, we're still on the same path.
Yeah.
All right, Matt. Well, we got into some pretty deep discussions about time travel and predestination and whatnot this time. This was a fun conversation. An above-average episode, which I feel like they could have done more with. There were a lot of cool concepts that could have been fleshed out in different ways, but on the whole, I mean, yeah, and enjoyable. And then, hey, look at the conversation it led to. So that alone was enough the price of the episode. So if people want to find you out there on the internet to talk more X-Files or anything else you might be doing, where can they find you?
Well, if you want to speak to me about science fiction or any other TV, anything, or just random stuff, you can find me on my personal Twitter account, which is xandmatt, but which is X and the word and, so XANDMATT on Twitter. It's a private account, but if you try and follow me, then if I don't think you're a weird person, then I'll accept you. But I now also have my own podcast called Pick a Disc, which is on all the sorts of social medias under the name Pick a Disc, because strangely no one else has thought of using that, where each fortnight a guest will speak to me about an album that they want to talk about, and we'll just have a chat, find out why they want to talk about it, why they like it, about the album, and wherever the conversation goes from there. So you can find me on Pick a Disc on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all that kind of stuff.
Alrighty, as for me personally, you can find me on Twitter at MooreOnZach. That's MooreOnZach. I'm also the host of my own podcast, Always Soul in the Smallville, which we mentioned a few times during our discussion here.
Is it any good?
That's right. Sometimes we have some guests that aren't so good. Matt Latham. But yes, Matt is a regular guest on our podcast, and we talk about each and every episode of that Young Superman show. And you can find us on Twitter at Always Smallville with one S. As you might have picked up on listening to me, this episode and others, I'm a huge Star Trek fan. I'm also host of a Star Trek podcast, Standard Orbit, on the Trek FM network. We talk about all things old and new, Captain Kirk and the Enterprise. You can find us on Twitter at Trek FM. And recently launched a new podcast called Franchise Fatigue with my friend Brandon Shea Matella, who's also a guest on the XCast from time to time. And we talk about the franchises, when they get fatigue, sequels, all that good stuff. And you can find us on Twitter at UFP Earth. The show is Franchise Fatigue. But until next time, remember, trust no one.
The XCast, an X-Files podcast, is produced and hosted by Tony Black, alongside a dedicated team of podcasters and X-Files fans. You can find the show on Twitter at the X_cast, on Facebook by typing in the XCast, or inside our group, the X-Files Basement, an XCast podcast fan group, plus on Instagram by typing in the XFcast. If you're a fan of the show, why not support us on Patreon? Exclusive bonus episodes, early access to new episodes, plus become part of our XCast community in the Patreon department. To see our monthly subscription options, just head to patreon.com/the XCast. That's patreon.com/the XCast. We'd love to see you join our Patreon community. We're also part of the We Made This podcast network at We Made This Pod on Twitter and We Made This on Facebook. You can find a range of shows on TV, film, music and popular culture in general on the network. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.